So, what is a curse anyway? And as we would like to have the illusion, at least, that we are rational and non-superstitious people, is there any value in considering the concept of a curse today? Shabbat Shalom, everyone. I'm Rabbi Paul, your virtual rabbi, and let's stir up some Torah together. As a relatively non-apologetic Gen Xer, I'm guessing that I'm not the only Gen Xer, especially coming from the States, whose first introduction to the concept of a curse came from the 1980 film The Curse of King Tut's Tomb. It was really in the zeitgeist at the time. In the late 70s and early 80s, we had the treasures of King Tut that were traveling around the United States, causing a buzz. 60 Minutes episodes, covers of National Geographic. It was everywhere. We saw it. We thought about it. And the underlying concept of a curse that was presented in the movie was relatively archetypal. So think about it for a second. We've got some wrong, in this case the wrong of robbing a grave, which actually probably is a pretty good wrong. And so some ancient words, a curse, are put together that anyone who should dare to break past this barrier of on this side no curse, on the other side curse, well, once we transgress that line, then whatever the text and intent of the curse is, that's what we're going to experience. And indeed, in the movie, the archaeologist Carter, he is stung by a bug relatively early on, dies, and then we get to watch, well, the ghost of King Tut, or the personification of the manifestation of the curse, slowly take the lives and or livelihoods of everyone who was involved in this particular, well, let's just call it grave robbing, because that's actually pretty accurately what it was. Although one must admit on the other side the wealth of information that this particular act of grave robbing did bring. But this archetypal understanding of curse is actually what I want to challenge. It's something that I've really done over and over again in my book, is this idea that we get stuck with our understanding of the non-physical world, the metaphysical world, that which lies beyond our ability to define scientifically at this time, not through what we experienced in Hollywood, but oftentimes something even earlier, what we experienced in childhood, our earliest images of theological, spiritual, even horrific concepts that came through picture books, cartoons, legends, and fairy tales. And so is it any surprise that when we run into lists of curses in our holy books, that we see it through those eyes, the eyes of, oh, an external godlike being, let's go ahead and once again call them Santa Claus God, has determined or has been appealed to by an earthly power, earthly influential person, that when something transgresses a particular viewpoint or law of that particular God, again, that Santa Claus God, the bearded dude who's looking over our shoulders to see if we're naughty or nice and is going to smite us if we're not, or at least not give us the candy that we want. And as soon as we cross that line, we invoke the curse, and then that external form, that external power, then places the curse upon us like a stigma, almost as if we could have a scarlet C tattooed into our foreheads or written upon our chests. And then if we read through these lists of curses in our holy books, and of course in Parashat Tavo this week, we've got a good list of them. We're not necessarily going to ask the question, what does this mean in context? We're going to tie it into, external deity with a beard about to zap us if we do this list of stuff that's wrong. And of course made far worse by the fact that there are roughly 3 times as many curses in the Torah as there are blessings, which just shows that the Torah understood marketing 101. If we have a good experience, we're going to tell 3 people. If we have a bad experience anywhere, we'll tell 10. Which is funny because it's true and is actually an entree into understanding what a curse actually is. Now, getting towards the end of Tavo in chapter 27 of Deuteronomy, we actually have an opportunity to really think about a curse in a different way because, well, it's been given a place. Something tangible happens. Now, if you're unfamiliar with this passage, just imagine this for a second. And interestingly enough, this comes as a command from Moses, not the Eternal speaking through Moses, not the usual formulation of Vaydaber Adonai el Moshe lemor, Tavo b'nei Israel. The Eternal said to Moses as follows, command the entire people of Israel. Instead, this is Moses who is commanding, and what he commands is that certain of the tribes stand on one mountain. That's Mount Gerizim, and the tribes there are Judah and Benjamin and Simeon and Levi, as well as Issachar and Yosef. And anyone who's read my book should be thinking, very interesting right now that those tribes are together on the mountain of blessing. And then these other tribes are to go and stand on Mount Ebal, which is the mountain where the curse is going to be spoken. And the tribes that are supposed to stand there are Reuben, Gad, Zebulun, Asher, Naphtali, Dan. And then we read in verse 15, the Levites shall then proclaim in a loud voice to all the people of Israel, cursed be anyone who makes a sculptured or molded image, abhorred by the Eternal, a craftsman's handiwork, and sets it up in secret. And all the people shall respond, Amen. Cursed be he who insults his father or mother, and all the people shall say, Amen. Cursed be he who moves his fellow countryman's landmark, and all the people shall say, Amen. And it continues. I'm going to read a few more because I can only read a few more. It's going to get to a list of things that if I were to read them out loud, I'd probably end up shadow banned again on YouTube. Cursed be he who misdirects a blind person on his way, and all the people shall say, Amen. Cursed be he who subverts the rights of the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow, and all the people shall say, Amen. And at that part I have to start quoting, but you are more than welcome to continue reading through the rest of them. Now there's quite a lot to unpack here. And hopefully you noticed, if you watched the sermon from last week, this mention of what we talked about last week, the moving of a fellow countryman's landmark, right? Moving the borders of our neighbor's land in order to make ourselves greater. If you haven't seen that, it pertains to what we're talking about, so go watch that. Link it down below. But the first thing we need to unpack is the drama of all this. We've got tribes gathered on one mountain, tribes gathered on the other, and as these curses, whatever that actually means, as these are spoken by the Levites, by the tribe of Levi, by the priestly tribe, those responsible for the ritual of Judaism while it was still a temple state, as they yell this out, everyone on the mountain of blessing and the mountain of curse has to say Amen. And depending on where you're coming from, I don't know what you're visualizing right now, but I think you should take a moment to actually ask yourself, what do you think Amen means in this moment? What do you visualize that means? Because regardless of our background, whether we have a Jewish background or whether you're coming at this from another tradition, we are deeply influenced by the popular culture around us, and we're going to have Amen shouted more from revival meetings than what we're necessarily going to consider as happening in a synagogue, although there's an awful lot of Amen shouted in a synagogue. When you hear it shouted in a synagogue, it actually has a legal function, a halakhic function. Back in the day, before the printing press, not everyone had a prayer book. There were very, very few. And actually, before we had prayer books, the people who were leading prayers, the shlachei tzibur, the ambassadors sent by the community to represent the community in prayer, they would half improvise the prayers. They had a part of the prayer that was set, called the keva, set in stone, and had the part called kavanah, which is improvised. Not how we use the word kavanah today. Today we use it as our intentionality that we bring to it, but that only happened because towards the end of the first millennium of the Common Era, we actually had two massive prayer books, the Siddur Rav Amram and the Machzor Vitri, that came out and kind of gave us the basis of every prayer book that exists today, setting a lot of what used to be improvised in stone, which then allowed us this beautiful concept of intentionality to take over for Kavanah. Instead of what we improvise in a prayer service, it's what we bring to it. But in that time, if you didn't have a prayer book, or if you didn't know what the prayers were, what were you going to do in order to fulfill your obligation of praying 3 times a day? And the answer was, when the Shlach Tzibor, the person sent by the community to represent them in prayer, would offer a blessing at the end of the blessing. So any part of a blessing where we hear Baruch Atah, then the person listening to it who doesn't know the prayer or doesn't have a prayer book would say Amen. And halakhically, according to Jewish law, it was as if the person saying the words Amen had actually said the blessing themselves, which is powerful in a lot of ways because it gives, at the very beginning of Jewish rabbinical prayer tradition, the ability for people who can't read, who are blind, who don't have the capacity to understand the prayer book, to still fully participate in prayer at a legal level. That's a pretty powerful thought in and of itself. But back to the term amen, that was a worthy discussion and a worthy digression. But amen comes from the word emunah. Anyone who has ever studied Maimonides or read through the 13 Principles is going to recognize ani me'emin be'emunah shlema. I believe with absolute and complete conviction. Emunah means steadfast, faith, faithful, sure. And so we have someone shouting these words, cursed be the person that, and everyone is required to then shout, I agree with that. Now, before we unpack any more, does this sound anything like the curse of King Tut? Does this sound anything like Santa Claus God zapping us? So once again, let's place ourselves in this drama. We are standing on one of these two mountains, and someone is shouting out these words, and we say, Amen. And the first words shouted out are, cursed be anyone who makes an idol, a molten image, in secret. And then we move on to, cursed be the one who insults mother and father. Cursed be the one who changes our property boundaries. Cursed be the one who misdirects a blind person, and cursed be the one who subverts the rights of the stranger, the widow, the orphan. So yeah, there's a little level of morality here, but this has some purely ethical stuff here. Do not act in such a way that you would not want someone to do the same thing to you were you in that same position. Don't cheat your neighbor because you don't want your neighbor to cheat you. Don't act unethically towards the people who are the poorest in society. Does this sound like we're being zapped by a magic wand, or is a curse in the Torah pointing to something completely different? See, if we're being really honest with ourselves, when we use a term like a curse, but think of the times that we've looked at, well, certain families where one thing after another happens to the family and we say, boy, that family's living under a curse. The reason a curse gains the power that it has and that we think of it the way that we do is because a curse is actually the word that Torah is using for the end point of a lot of things that we can't see. A created situation that breaks structure in a profound enough way that there's no good that's going to come from it at some point. So let me give you an example. This comes from ancient Greece. I'm totally retranslating, totally repurposing this because the original version isn't going to work here. But assume that we have a wise person walking along the street who is estranged from their family. Or let's say that every one of the children in the family has done something horribly, horribly wrong. But yet the family is a well-known family, upstanding, respected by everyone, the Job of the society. And let's say that this wise person is completely self-aware and understands what has happened. The person from the outside is going to come up and say, hey, it's like your family's under a curse. All these bad things keep on happening to you. And this is where the analogy gets hard, but listen, it's ancient Greece, so just stay with me for a second. The wise person answers back, look at my shoes. Okay, nice shoes. Are they not new? Yes, they are. Are they not well made? Yes, they are. But yet you cannot see where I am pinched by them. You see, here's the thing. And anyone who grew up in a horribly toxic situation is going to completely understand this, especially a toxic situation where the parents are upright, well-known, respected people in the community. But if you've kept on reading through the rest of the curses that are shouted on this mountain, then you'll know that some of those things that are listed that happen within families are not things that are public and might never, ever be made public. But if they're going on, that creates a situation that is broken. It creates a situation where it is so much more difficult to individuate, so much more difficult to become a whole person without having to come over profound drama. And some of you, I'm sorry, watching this, you sadly know exactly what I'm talking about. And so we go off the rails. Our life becomes complicated, difficult. It becomes a life of wandering, meaninglessness, addiction. And people say, oh, you came from such an amazing family. How do we answer them when we know what may have happened to us? And thank goodness I'm not talking about my family right now, but have unfortunately seen these stories in my office over and over again. The brokenness of that person where someone says, boy, it looks like they are living a cursed life, is the end result of actions that have been below the surface. Now go back a couple thousand years, somewhere between 2,500 and 3,000 years ago, with this group of people that are attempting to find a new way to exist, a different sort of ethic, a different sort of morality, a different sort of theology. And as these people are trying to figure out their way to work together and to exist together, they're starting to come up with, well, these are the things that when they happen, they cause damage, they cause brokenness in families, in societies, in a village along the way. And although I think it's very political from the final version of the Torah on who's standing on which mountain, but let's say the tribe of Dan, who had a reputation in the Tanakh for having a lot of idolatry, you're one of the people who is in secret making idols to continue with a form of worship from the past, and you're standing there and you are hearing this shouted, cursed be the one who in secret makes and sets up an idol, and you are forced to shout, Amen. Do you not have a tangible sense, let's just call it of conviction, when this drama is happening? And yeah, as we get close to Rosh Hashanah, I can't help but see the image in my mind of all of society gathered on a single mountain, the mountain of curse, as someone is shouting out to us saying, cursed be the people who believe they are always right and the other group that they disagree with are always wrong. And everyone's suddenly afraid to shout, Amen, because God forbid I step away from some popular ideology. The reality of the curse is not something external. Torah is written in the language of humans as we were best able to use it, as we were best able to understand. And an external anthropomorphic God was the best image we could do 3,000 years ago. But we're still stuck with that image today, even though Judaism has tried really hard to get away from it. And so it's really hard to look at curse and not see it as something that's put on us and not ask the question, what have we done in secret to disrespect those who have taught us and given to us, to disrespect our neighbors, to take someone who can't quite see things in the way that we can and mock them as we point them in the wrong direction, to justify saying that the rights that I have because of my situation should be different than the rights that they have because they're less than I. Are these curses that were shouted really so different than what we're experiencing today? And did they think that what was happening here was an external curse? Remember, Moses commanded the people, not the voice of the eternal through Moses. The human beings in society were recognizing that there were things that were happening on a regular basis, hidden, whether we want to admit them or not, that when they happen, we see an end result. Eventually, after everything has been broken and torn down, we see something that we thought on the surface looked so good, so healthy, so beautiful, and then we see all these broken people and we wonder, gee, how did that happen? They must be under some sort of curse. Well, yeah, they are. That we created, that we've done. So much of what we roll our eyes in Jewish tradition and say, superstitious idiocy from the past, doesn't pertain to us today. Cursed are us who think that we're right all the time and have nothing to learn from anything else. Which brings the question on, which mountain are we standing on? If we're allowed to stand on the mountain of blessing, it's because we've engaged in this process we should be going through right now before Rosh Hashanah, the process of looking deep in our soul and actually recognizing we've hurt someone and that we have the responsibility to make amends. The Eternal cannot forgive us for a harm that we have committed against another human being. We need to repair that relationship first. A lifetime lived with broken relationships that are never repaired, where we never take this process seriously, becomes a lifetime that on the surface might just look wonderfully because I might have an incredibly successful life stepping on all those people, but I am living a life of curse and I'm not standing on the mount of blessing even though I appear to be. I'm actually standing there having to listen to people call out the truths of my life, and I have to say amen. So the first bit of work is seeing which mountain we're actually standing on. Even if we don't have the ability right now to admit it to anyone else, at least looking in the mirror and admitting where we actually are standing. The second is to think, what would we shout? How would we formulate this differently to help us all together, not just the people who agree with us and not just the people who disagree with us, but all of us? What do we all need to hear so that after we say amen, we can begin the process of moving from the mountain of curse to the mountain of blessing? And let us all say amen. Shabbat shalom, everyone. We'll see you next time.
Adonai ohev et amo Yisrael